This episode of Out of Spec Reviews is brought to you by Magna. More on that later. Hello and welcome to another Out of Spec Reviews video. Welcome to beautiful, sunny Pasadena, California, and welcome to the Toyota Mirai. This is the second generation Mirai, and in this video we're going to drive it for the first time. Not only are we going to be experiencing the Mirai for the first time, but we're also going to be experiencing a hydrogen car for the first time. Now I know the comment section is going to get flooded with controversy. We have viewers who love hydrogen, viewers who hate hydrogen. It's very much like the electric vehicle conversation, especially when we bring combustion into the mix. This is going to be an interesting one. Even if you're against hydrogen, I encourage you watching because I've learned a ton, not only about the Mirai, but also the way that it's powered and a little bit about the infrastructure as well. And I'm really looking forward to sharing with you what I've learned so far. And actually, it's kind of fascinating stuff. So tune in, going to be a long video. We're going to take this for a drive, talk about how it drives, talk about intricacies of fuel cells, and it'll be broken up really into two main goals. I want to tell you all about the car, and I want to tell you all about the hydrogen stuff. So a little bit about the Mirai itself first. It's built on the GAL chassis, which is the pretty much same chassis as the Lexus LS. This is slightly shrunked though, so the LS is a little bit longer, a little bit more luxurious. But what's interesting in my opinion is, well actually it is really just in the US, this is the most luxurious Toyota you can buy today because it's pretty much a Lexus LS on the inside. And so I think that's kind of neat. The previous generation Mirai looked like this weird adapted bloated Prius thing, and it was front motor, front wheel drive. It wasn't that inspiring of a vehicle. This looks stunning. Really good looking car. Love this specification in this blue. I think it really looks great. Of course, you get all the benefits of a battery electric vehicle, carpool lanes, government incentives, etc. And this particular one costs $67,400 MSRP. That seems like quite a bit, but around here in California, which is pretty much the only place you could drive one because of the hydrogen thing, we'll explain that. You can lease it for about 650 bucks a month, couple grand down, and then Toyota gives you a card with $15,000 on it for free fuel, hydrogen. And so basically where my head has gone to this, and we've got to meet a few hydrogen owners in the area and things like this. A lot of EV owners have to do what these cars are doing behind you right now. And same with the BZ4X we've also reviewed, I threw on the charger. These Teslas are sitting here for 45 minutes, an hour. These are urban superchargers. To get 100% charge takes at least an hour pretty much on any EV. Some EVs take 2 hours, some EVs take 45 minutes, but a long amount of time. And especially if you don't have apartment charging, condo charging, home charging for whatever reason, and you need to rely on the public DC fast charging network to get you down the road, that is pretty inconvenient. And I've always said owning an EV really doesn't make sense unless you have a lot of time to charge or you have home-based charging or workplace charging. And the main benefit of a battery electric vehicle is being able to charge up overnight. In Southern California, a lot of people can't charge at home. So here comes the Mirai. This can go, in our test, from 0 to full in about 4.5 to 5 minutes at a hydrogen station. So if you just look at it from a broad perspective, this has a little bit more range than most EVs, about 320 miles, but the base car can go over 400. And it can fuel itself in a very short amount of time. And so I get it kind of around here. Now, the hydrogen stations seem to be the biggest issue because some are online, some are offline. I'll talk about that in the car, how you find them, how we did. Yesterday, if you go to our sister channel, Out of Spec Motoring, I don't know when the video will go up. We took this on a 300-ish mile drive from here in Pasadena, San Diego, did a whole bunch of driving around and came up. We had to fill up twice, once before we left and once after we got back. And seamless experience both times. It was really neat, and we'll have a video coming on how all that works, which was really interesting. So maybe our experience is unique where we've had a good time, but I'm pretty impressed with the hydrogen thing. Okay, back to the car. Let me pop the hood really quick. Under the hood, there is a hydrogen fuel cell stack, and there's 300 individual little fuel cells that make up the powertrain for this vehicle under here. Essentially, this makes, let me just pull up my notes so I don't give you wrong information. Yeah, this makes 128 kilowatts worth of power, and you guys are all familiar with that. So 128 kilowatts, which then can go and power, one thing I'm not totally sure of, and I can't actually find any information on it, I'm not sure if the energy, the electricity generated from this fuel cell stack can directly power the rear electric motor without running through the battery pack first. I think it can. The graphics in the car says it can, because there's also a 1.1 kilowatt hour or so lithium ion battery pack, 1.24 kilowatt hour, excuse me, lithium ion battery pack in the rear. The previous generation Mirai used a nickel metal hydrate battery that was a little bit bigger and a little bit heavier. So just to walk you through how the whole drivetrain system works, you fill it with hydrogen. It goes into one of 3 tanks. There's one tank that goes down the center of the car. There's a tank under the rear seat, and there's a tank under the battery pack. And so basically small, medium, large tanks. Each tank is made of multiple layers, carbon weave, extremely durable, can handle, I think, 84 megapascals worth of pressure, which is well over 10,000 PSI. So just insane tanks. The vehicle requires an H70 hydrogen fueling to get a full charge. Here's the funny thing about hydrogen. I've always kind of made fun of this, to be totally honest. I think it's kind of hilarious. You can go to a hydrogen station that's labeled H35, which is 35 megapascals or about 5,000 PSI. And because it relies on pressure to fill up the tanks, that can only fill this thing up to 50% state of charge or half full, however the terminology is. And so you have to go to an H70 station to get the full 70 megapascals to max out these tanks. Now, my understanding is during the fueling process, you can get spikes in pressure, which is why the tanks in the car are rated for 85 or 84 megapascals worth of pressure. So anyway, you fill it with hydrogen. Then up front, of course, you take hydrogen compressed, you take oxygen fed by like an electric supercharger, if you will, that forces clean, purified, that runs through a charcoal filter and a PM 2.5 like HEPA filter type situation into the fuel cell stack, which then does a whole bunch of chemical reactions, which produces 2 byproducts. One would be electricity. The second would be pure water. So what's funny is Alyssa behind the camera actually was following me the other day, because I've actually driven this around a little bit. So even though the videos, I drive a hydrogen car for the first time, I've already driven it, but I'm going to explain to you all of my initial feelings. She said when I floored it, a whole bunch of water came out the back. Right, Alyssa? Yep. Yeah, that's so funny. And so that's kind of cool. I mean, I think it's fascinating to me. You know, I'm not an electric car guy. I've said this many times. I'm not a combustion car guy. I'm not a hydrogen guy. I'm a driving, motoring enthusiast. I enjoy anything on 4 wheels, and I'm fascinated by different ways to power them. Diesel, gas, compressed natural gas, battery electric, fuel cell electric, etc. And this is genuinely my first time experiencing this. So I'm actually like super pumped about it. I think it's kind of, I almost like that it's compromised in so many ways because it makes it interesting. So some interesting things happen once it generates that electricity. The water goes to a little bit of a storage tank underneath the vehicle somewhere, and occasionally it will purge the water. My understanding is if you don't want your garage floor to get wet, there's an H2O button on the dashboard that can manually purge the water from the from the holding tank before you pull into your garage, or where if you need to purge it for whatever reason. There's another reason why you would need to purge water, but it's really more like a total water evacuation. And that would be if the vehicle is in sub-zero conditions, pulled either by a trailer where the heater couldn't keep up because there's a ton of airflow, or if you disconnect the 12-volt battery in very cold weather scenarios. What you do is you hold the H2O button, start up the car, it takes I think like a half hour, and it purges water out of the entire system, not just the holding tank, so that if it does freeze, you're not going to break anything. Although like in California where these things are sold, like you'll never have to do it. The car is fine to minus 22 degrees Fahrenheit or Celsius, I don't remember, one of them. Pretty cold temperatures basically either way. I think it's minus 22 C. Let me check my notes too so I have it. Minus 22 F, minus 30 C. Okay, so it's good to minus 30 C, which is very, very cold. And you can just start it, cold startability too there, which is impressive for a hydrogen vehicle. What's interesting about this though is it's also affected by altitude. Because there's an oxygen component, as you gain elevation, which we're going to do today, we're going to go up to about 7,000 feet of elevation or so up Angeles Crest. In theory, it should have less power output. I'm looking forward to trying that. Okay, so that's what happens to the water. Here's what happens to the electricity generated. The electricity generated then gets fed through high voltage cables to the rear motor. It's really a luxury electric vehicle setup where you have, sort of front powertrain, rear motor, traditional style. Makes sense because it's very similar to the Lexus LS. In the rear, my understanding, and again, this is where I'm hoping one of you commenters would know. It's the weekend, so I can't ask anyone at Toyota. I believe the hydrogen fuel cell stack can either directly power the electric motor, or it can put its energy into the battery. I know for sure it can directly charge the battery pack, but I don't know if the energy to the drive motor can go through just the battery pack, or fed from the motor. Basically, yeah, you guys get the idea. And the tuning logic for this, we're going to talk about when we're driving it, is very similar to their combustion powertrain vehicles, where, at low speed, you use the battery pack. Under medium acceleration, the fuel cell unit kicks on. At highway speeds, you're pretty much just using the fuel cell to cruise along, which is a really interesting thing. By the way, we'll talk about it when we drive. This makes almost no noise. The only time you can hear it is if you roll the windows down and you go wide open throttle and let off. It kind of sounds like a turbocharger building boost and then a wastegate letting the air out. It's very quiet, very faint. But it's actually really kind of a pleasant noise that it makes. It's really, really interesting. The fuel cell has its own requirements and very limited maintenance schedule. You really don't have to do much with it. There's no real taking care of it, is my understanding, but it can get hot if you work it too hard. And what's funny is the fuel cell unit makes a little bit less peak power than what the electric motor can output. So in theory, if we go up in elevation on a steep climb, we might actually have a little bit of power reduction when we run out of the battery pack juice. That I'm really looking forward to seeing what happens. It's happened with combustion Toyota hybrids before, where I've gone wide open throttle up a hill, use the peak power from the battery, and then it goes really slow because we just have to use whatever's left over in the combustion engine. At least this is sized pretty nicely. Let me show you the trunk. At first, when I got this thing, I was like, oh my goodness, we got a hatchback because it looked like that, but no, it's just here. And you can see there's no pass-through or anything like that because of where the fuel tanks are. And there's very little underfloor storage as well. So it's not necessarily like a super practical vehicle, although you could definitely fit 2 golf clubs in here, 2 sets, maybe a third. So it's probably fine for what most people are going to be using this for. What else do we need to know? 0 to 60 is 9.4 seconds. It's not fast, but it's not like slow to the point where you're driving around going, I wish I had more power. It's a luxury sedan. It's nice to cruise and waft down the road in this. It doesn't really encourage sporty driving per se. Now, in terms of range, the hydrogen fuel tank's peak can hold about 5.5 kilograms, which is what, 11-ish, 12 pounds or so of hydrogen, which is a really interesting way to measure things. So we see the gauge basically on a full tank recommending somewhere around 300 miles. This is the fuel cell limited, not limited in terms of range, limited in terms of it's the top trim, which means it's got the spicy wheels and the glass roof, and it weighs about 70 pounds more than the base car. This gets 357 miles of range by the EPA. What's wild is the base car gets 402 miles of range by the EPA. And I don't know why there's such a big disparity. I mean, a couple little equipment changes, but like that's a massive change. So I bet in the real world, it's not that big of a difference. I'd love to do a range test. I just don't think there's that much of a market for videos on hydrogen cars and stuff yet, although maybe there will be. We'll see what you guys think. I'd definitely like to learn a little bit more about them. To fill a hydrogen fuel cell vehicle in terms of cost, we'll have a whole video coming on that. It's between $60 and $80 to go 0 to full. And based off of our experience in Southern California this time of the year, which is early 2022, April. Yeah, pretty interesting. It takes about 5 minutes. So I am, first off, loving the styling. I'm loving the controversy. I posted on Twitter. We had a whole bunch of fights breaking out in the comments of people loving hydrogen, hating hydrogen. I don't know why you would really hate it. Because it's kind of interesting to me. And the fuel cell station that we used, I believe, was an electrolyzer station, which meant that it doesn't really run out of pressure. It doesn't really run out of trucks arriving to there. It just generates its own hydrogen when it needs on site from hopefully clean electricity. Now the round trip efficiency of that electricity is not as high as it would be in a battery electric vehicle. You have to spend a lot of electricity to separate hydrogen out, compress it, chill it to -40, fill back into the car, run it through this crazy process just to turn it back into electricity to move it. With a battery electric vehicle, you just plug the thing in and you put electricity right into the vehicle. So it's definitely less efficient from a round trip perspective. The benefits here are quick refueling times, easy to have more range because you just need tank capacity, and you're not really hauling around a big heavy battery pack. This thing weighs about 4,300 pounds, by the way. So let's go for a drive. I know that's a lot of information. I'm learning as I go, and really looking forward to telling you all about how the Mirai drives. This episode is proudly brought to you by Magna. Magna is a mobility technology company that is super unique because they touch every aspect of almost every car in the market, especially a lot of electric vehicles, and they even can produce vehicles from the ground up. Now, you may remember I shot a series just recently testing some of their new electric vehicle powertrains, so stay tuned for a lot of Magna content to come. We're going to be going in depth with some really interesting topics with these guys, and Out of Spec wants to thank Magna for sponsoring this review and tons of other videos to come right here on Out of Spec. We look forward to working with Magna to define and find out what the future of mobility looks like. You join me inside of the Mirai now, where it's time to go for a drive, in different driving environments and see how this all works. We have a B-Class electric, California only. I'm just fascinated driving around California usually. I just see weird stuff that we don't get in Colorado. In terms of the electric motor, 182 horsepower, 134 kilowatts. The hydrogen output is 128 kilowatts. So in theory, you could use up your kilowatt hour buffer and lose a little bit of max power, but doesn't really matter. It all seems sized right. The battery pack weighs 44.6 kilograms. And the material of the hydrogen tank's really interesting. It's a polymer lined layer to hold the hydrogen. It's a structural layer of carbon fiber reinforced polymer to provide strength for the middle, and then the outside is a glass fiber reinforced polymer to help protect from surface abrasion. Compressed hydrogen gas is inside, of course. I'd like to show you some of the noises this thing makes, so let me crack some windows just so you can hear this noise. And it just sounds, you probably won't be able to pick it up too much. It sounds like there's a little turbocharger running in the background to just kind of spool up the air, and that's actually what's happening. It really is just pressurizing the oxygen into the fuel cell when you go wide open throttle. The response immediacy, foot down, is pretty much the same as you would expect from a battery electric vehicle. And what's amazing is this little 1.2 kilowatt hour battery pack operates at a voltage of over 300 volts and is pretty good at juicing the power. It can get it out there. In terms of turning radius, very impressive for a big car. It does all the luxury things you would expect, you know, a luxury sedan to do, which is really nice. Fascinating stuff in the Mirai, just to see all of it come together and kind of work. It feels very early days. It feels, you know, like, you know, should we even put effort into hydrogen? A lot of people will say no. And I tend to agree for the general passenger car space that hydrogen as a whole technology doesn't seem to be superior to electric or combustion from a ownership and usability perspective. And I think a lot of this comes down to the efficiency of powering a hydrogen vehicle. This Mirai has a funny screen here I can pull up, and it shows how much air I've purified by driving it. And the more oxygen I flow through the engine, the more it claims it cleans the air, and it has people running behind the vehicle. What's funny though is the harder I drive it, if I floor it, right, driving it inefficiently, technically I'm cleaning more oxygen, and so it encourages you to drive it faster, which is kind of funny and like not the point. So like, that's a dumb screen. The reason I bring this up though is the car is not factoring in the emissions from creating the hydrogen that's powering this vehicle. Now, most stations, is my understanding, they are typically trucked in from natural gas producing some byproduct, you know, to create the compressed hydrogen gas. And it's pretty not clean, and it's very energy intensive. There's another way to make hydrogen, which is a process through electrolysis, which is actually a station we have going in at our office in Colorado, which I'm actually kind of excited about, because we'll be able to power it using solar or wind or, you know, some sort of clean generation. And that, at that point, that's usable hydrogen that's like actually clean, and that's where this screen makes sense. So I'm okay with that. What the flip side of that argument would be, like, you just spend a whole bunch of energy to make hydrogen as a storage, you know, of that energy. Essentially, it's a medium for the energy storage. Why wouldn't you just put that energy to something that needed it in real time, or into a battery pack, or another case? And these are all that's the topic of the 2020s, is how are you storing your energy? What are you going to do to maximize your efficiency? But on the flip side, how do we improve the ownership experience and usability of vehicles? And that's where hydrogen comes into play. That's where I can bring this to a fueling station, assuming it's full. Based off my experience, I've only been to full stations and they've been great. Well, I'm going to try a third, which is I'm going to find like an old crappy station. I just want to see what that's like. So keep an eye on Out of Spec TikTok for that one. I have had nothing but great experience filling this thing. I plug the hose in like a fuel tank. It just snaps on. I hit go. 4 minutes later, it says you're full. And it charges you some amount of money, but Toyota gives you free hydrogen. Now, they gave me gift cards to fill this one up, which was really nice of them, but I've opted not to use them. I'm just paying to fill it up. Myself, it was about, you know, 50 or 60 bucks to fill it up, something like that. So, like, compared to expensive gas here, it's not far off, which is kind of interesting. So lots of considerations when it comes to hydrogen. I understand that it, for most people, makes sense to have a battery electric vehicle. Driving it though is really kind of interesting. So first of all, the cabin is wonderful. This is a great place to sit. I have this gorgeous sort of glass roof with this pillar. It doesn't seem to open, but there is a pillar here. That's okay. I have just a wonderful rear seat. It's a little bit smaller than an LS, but probably feels a little bit bigger than an ES Lexus. I got a Prius shifter, which is kind of funny. I have 3 different drive modes: Eco, Normal, and Sport, and pretty good driver assistance. Now, this is a 2021 Mirai, and it will soon be updated for the 2022 model year with a whole bunch of new driver assistance stuff, and I think an even cheaper version. I think it starts at around 50 grand. This one's 67,000. So it's maxed out. And used, I have to bring up the topic of economics here. You can pick up a 2021 Mirai with like 7,000 miles on it right now. And there's some with 1,000 miles on it for sale for like 30 grand. And actually, if you go for a base one, that's limited. Base ones are 25 grand. And I'm thinking like, okay, if we have a hydrogen station going in at our office in Colorado, how neat would it be to just buy one of those and play around with it for a year and see what it does in really cold temperatures, really warm temperatures. We have cleanly generated hydrogen. They're probably not even going to use all of it. And so, like, why not? We'll be tethered. I can do my airport runs with everything I need to do tethered to that station. I think it'd be an interesting experiment. And who knows, maybe Toyota will even let us borrow one and bring it out to Colorado for a little while. But I think the technology, while right now I'm not seeing the light, it is important to understand way more deeply than I do right now, way more deeply than many people do right now. And I kind of feel like I'm, you know, when you see those guys reviewing an EV for the first time and they're like getting kilowatt and kilowatt hour mixed up and they don't know what to do with the plug handles. And like, I feel like that's me in hydrogen. It's like this renewed excitement almost because I can learn. And I'm not here to learn to say hydrogen's the best. I'm here to just figure it out and understand why so many people are passionate about this technology. And so forgive me if I get a few facts wrong, but I'm really actually fascinated by this process. Now for passenger cars, again, I think it's kind of silly. For medium and heavy duty trucks though, hydrogen does make a lot of sense. First off, battery weight is huge, and the more battery weight that you have, the less you can carry in terms of load. So if you just have a tank that weighs 30-40 pounds, whatever it is, and then you put, you know, 30-40 pounds worth of hydrogen in it, I'm just making up numbers, that's a lot less than 1,000, 2, 3, 4, 5,000 pound battery pack a class 8 semi truck would need. Also, the refueling times, because it's all pressure based, are insanely quick, assuming the station is good. And that's the same with an EV. EV charging can be really quick, assuming you're at a fast charger. There's caveats for both. And it's just an interesting world. I'm open to it. I know a lot of you are not, but I am. And I'm sort of, sort of really kind of into it. In terms of driving the Mirai, let's get down to the car now. It drives wonderfully. So we're here in the city. The throttle feels just like an electric car. I can smack it down. We have instant response and we go. You do hear a little bit of a hissing sound when it goes to full power, and that's really the air supercharger pushing things through the hydrogen fuel cell stack, or fuel stack. I don't think that's the cell portion. Again, I'm still trying to figure out all the terminology. It's very interesting. So you get a whooshing of sound as it does its chemical process, and it sounds really pleasant, but you have to really listen for it. The car also has piped in noise through ASC that I can turn on. So here I've turned it on, and that just sounds really dumb. So I'm going to turn that off. And they have different sounds for different drive modes, and you guys know that's just not my style, and it's just all pretty terrible if you ask me. So we're keeping all of that off. There's also a brake hold, so it'll hold me at a stoplight, and then I can hit the accelerator pedal and go. No one pedal driving here. Again, it could probably be software updated to do that. And basically it's very similar to driving like a combustion hybrid Toyota, which is actually a huge compliment, because their hybrids are some of the best and well-calibrated hybrids on the market. They are fantastic cars. No one can doubt that. They last a really long time. Like a Prius lasts forever. I was just in one in Chicago that had over 300,000 miles. The guy's like, it's just getting broken in, and it felt brand new. So their hybrid technology is great. Instead of having a combustion engine, they just have sort of a silent fuel cell. So the logic as to when does it use the battery pack, when does it use the fuel cell, and how does this change seems to be almost identical logic to what they use with their combustion engines. And what's interesting is on the Mirai, it will actually learn your routes and then be like, oh, you've driven this road before. Let me optimize based off of previous driving usage on this section of road. Let me optimize how to get the best efficiency out of both. Now, what I haven't figured out at all is how to figure out what my efficiency is. You know, in a combustion car, you can use miles per gallon. In an electric car, you can use miles per kilowatt hour, or watt hour per mile, or you know, kilowatt hours per 100 miles. In this, all I get is MPGE, and I see no statistics other than MPGE. And I'm curious what the hydrogen equivalent measurement would be. It would probably be something like kilograms per mile or grams per mile of hydrogen in terms of weight would be my guess, but I'm not totally positive on that. Again, this is my first experience with hydrogen. I just don't know. But I will say that the best MPGe this thing got was 999. That was just coasting. And the latest was 55 MPGe because I was hammering it last night. And so even beating the snot out of it, it did pretty well. Not sure where we're going, but we'll go straight. No one else is going straight. Yeah, so it drives just like an electric car, which is really neat. It is slow. So it's punchy off the line. It's got a lot of low-end torque, and it definitely goes pretty good. But 134 kilowatts to move a 4,300-pound executive sedan is not rapid. And so what that means is at city speeds, low speed, you do get the EV off the line thing. It seems to be geared really short for sort of torque off the line. But when you're cruising down the highway and you want to do like a 60 to 90 roll, it's like, I'm just going to stay wide open for a little while here. And it's also my understanding that at some point, the hydrogen fuel cell or the hydrogen stack can overheat. I don't think it happens in normal driving. I just was looking through the warning books and it says over temperature is a warning. So there is a temperature component to this. It does generate heat while it's working, which would be a loss of energy somewhere in the system. What's funny is it does dump water when you floor it as well. So yeah, I mean, it just feels like an electric Lexus LS. Nothing more to say there. What do you say we drive it on the highway? I mean, we could talk about the driver assistance in this, although it's not even the newest Mirai. And maybe we'll just wait to review the newest Mirai. So this has Toyota Safety Sense 2.5. I'm wide open throttle here, just so you know. Yeah, that was 60 on a downhill. So it takes a little while. And now it says, no, we're good. We're just on a road. Nice. I have no idea where we're going. Somewhere in California. Yeah, smooth, comfortable, quiet here at relatively higher speeds. I can kick on the driver assistance, Toyota Safety Sense 2.5. They have a new one coming. Ooh, stop sign, on the brakes. Brake pedal feels just like any other Toyota hybrid or EV that you would have driven. It does a blended approach where when you lift off the throttle, you get a little bit of regen. There is a braking mode, a BR, that comes on just for 1 or 2 stopping instances. But it actually, as soon as you touch the accelerator pedal, it goes back to drive. So that's really for steep downhills. What's interesting though is it gives you a peak regen for like 10 seconds, and then it goes back to normal even if you're in braking. And my guess is the battery pack, the little 1.2 kilowatt hour, just can't handle peak charging rates for that long, and it's just trying to protect the lithium ion battery pack. A hydrogen car, technically, I would think, can be without a battery pack. I don't know if there are any on sale today because the unit generates electricity, which could directly power an electric motor. The case in the Mirai, and I'm pretty sure the Clarity and the Nexo, is it's a hydrogen stack with a battery pack. And that makes the most sense in terms of a drivetrain alignment, because with regen, you can store your captured energy with deceleration. That's why mild hybrids and regular hybrids make a lot of sense for everyday driving. You're not burning off energy as heat through friction braking. And it's, you know, it's all about how do you maximize efficiency with cars these days. And so right now we're charging the battery as we're going forward, which I can then use to deploy for acceleration. And also it means that the hydrogen fuel stack doesn't need to have such a shift in load all the time. Now, I'm not so familiar with this type of system, and I don't know if load changes are good for it or bad for it, or it just doesn't care. Like a combustion engine doesn't really care if you go, you know, 10%, 100% throttle, 30, 60, 20, that people normally drive like that, and they've been doing this for years and they just don't care. I'm not sure what the intricacies of the hydrogen stack are, but I'd love to learn this stuff. I think that would be fascinating. So I guess they're not crossing the street. And I like the little whooshing sounds you get when you go pretty hard on the throttle. What else should we talk about? I don't know. Let's go drive it hard. I want to see how this thing handles, because it seems to be set up really nicely. Pretty soft, but like a real nice setup. And in their like press materials, they were talking about twisty roads and all these things. So I'm going to put it in sport mode. We're going to shred it up a road. Before we do that, let me know if you would be curious on if we should do hydrogen car range tests. And the nice thing about a range test with a hydrogen car is it's actually range you could use every time. So on a road trip with an EV, you're typically only charging to 50 to 80% state of charge at maximum, because it starts to slow down as it fills up. With hydrogen, that's not the case. But there are other issues. There's just not many stations for hydrogen. There's tons of DC chargers across the country. We've driven across the country together on video many times in an electric car. And I guess the case for hydrogen would be, if the infrastructure's there, you can fill it in 4 or 5 minutes, and then, yeah, there's Mirais everywhere around here, by the way. They're very popular. And then you can go your full range after 4 or 5 minutes. With an EV, the fastest EV I've ever tested is about 10 minutes, 0 to 50%, and about 45 minutes, 0 to 100% is the fastest I've ever seen. And then you get about the same range, or even slightly less than this car. This car seems to be doing about 280, 290 miles at 80 miles an hour, 85 miles an hour, whatever I was doing, ripping up and down the highways. Seemingly good range for very quick refill stops. And again, Toyota comps the fuel, which is wonderful. So it's not as bad as a lot of people have made it out to be in this area. It would never work in Colorado other than having our own fueling station that we would be tethered to. But I'm not minding it very much. I'm actually kind of seriously enjoying it. It's fascinating. See you in the mountains. Well, let's find out what happens when you drive a hydrogen car hard. So I'm going to go sport mode on, traction control off, VSC turned off, thank you. Just want to have all control. I'm going to pull up my air purification meter here. The reason I keep this up is not to see how many thousands of liters per minute of oxygen I'm purifying, because again, that's a misleading number, not factoring in where the fuel's coming from. It's the only way I can see sort of on a gauge how much load the hydrogen unit's under. In theory, if I'm cleaning more oxygen, it's working harder. And it goes from 0 to 5,000 liters per minute. So it's almost like a tachometer, but for cleaning oxygen, which is kind of really interesting. So anyway, let's pull out of here and let's give it full beans. So that's full power. Really snappy to about 40 miles an hour, maybe 35, and then it just falls on its face. So it's definitely geared towards urban acceleration. That 9.2 seconds though is not representative of what it feels like at low speed, but it is very representative as to what it feels like at medium and higher speed. And so the acceleration just isn't there. What I'm curious though is what happens if we basically, you know, we're going to go from sea level to 2,000 feet of elevation, which is roughly where we are here, all the way up to about 7,000. So it's going to be working hard. The electric motor is going to be working hard, and I'm not sure what's going to get hot. I don't like all these warnings coming up with traction control off, so maybe I'll just turn it back on. If it gets in the way, we'll turn it off later. How about that? So let's hope this RAV4 pulls over for us. Negativo. Of course. But this beginning section of the road's never good to like shred on. You always want to go up, you know, where there's less traffic and less cars, and people are a little bit crazy out on the weekends with good weather, of course. So let's see, will he pull for us? Yes, he will. Nice. So acceleration, headlights on, by the way. Lots of electrical and whooshing noises. Very silent though, but it's definitely multiple things making noise. Wow, the car feels so grown up. And by that I mean it feels like a true sports luxury sedan under light, you know, conditions. Now we haven't really pushed it yet. I'm sure maybe it'll fall apart when you drive it hard, but just like the steering, really nicely weighted, good and direct. I wouldn't say much feedback per se, but I would say, yeah, like, wow, this thing actually handles pretty well. Now, the previous gen Mirai, my understanding was Toyota made no money on that car. That was more of a passion project, I guess, a research project. This is a profitable car for Toyota, but just barely, is my understanding. Just based off of browsing the forums, I've seen that kind of thrown around a few times. That's loaded into a corner. Oh yeah, bouncy when you really push it. It's funny because you could just go wide open throttle on the rear axle, even though it's rear wheel drive. You have no risk of oversteer happening because it's yeah, it makes no power. But wow, the steering is so much better than expected. It weights up in sport mode, which is kind of interesting. And you know, the accelerator pedal, you floor it, and you know, you it's a momentum car. You know, I read on one of those like green websites or something like that, I don't even know which one, and it was like, hydrogen has the same performance benefits of an electric vehicle with huge acceleration. I'm like, I just got out of a Plaid that would smoke this thing. Like, you would need like 30 of these things combined to keep up with one Plaid. So I don't think we've seen like a fun hydrogen car yet. My understanding is the Nexo and the Clarity are also relatively low-powered vehicles. I'm sure there are other hydrogen passenger vehicles on the market. I don't know if there are any American ones, though. Mostly are all from overseas, so Korean or Japanese vehicles, which seems very interesting to me. In Japan, hydrogen seems to have a little bit more of a jump start than it does here in the U.S., although the hydrogen hub in the U.S. is where we are in Southern California, and definitely get that sense of people, kind of excited about hydrogen. Oh, letting us go for a pass. Thank you so much. Appreciate that. Can't find the hazards. There they are. And we hit them on the dash. So let's just continue through. Wow. This thing is freaking awesome. Definitely hammers pretty nicely. Wow, I am liking it. And let's just do a little dab of brakes on the way in and back to full power. We got a Honda right behind us too, who's keeping up no problem, which is awesome. And the dude in the Honda's right with us. This is great. I got to pull over for him in the Mirai. Oh, now we're in traffic. Wow, that was sweet. I'll let him go by just so he can get the pass. Oh, gave us a big thumbs up, big wave. That must be kind of funny. Now I do hear some cooling fans kicking on after that. Very interesting. Honda Civic Sport, thing's a ripper. Yeah, I mean, that weighs half as much as this car. It was really funny. This is like leaned over in the corner and he's just right there. That was great. Wow, this is kind of fun and really good. I'm not one that loves hardcore acceleration or nothing. There's a lot of 0 to 60 freaks online and out in the world that just like want the fastest thing. And I'm not saying I don't like that. I do, but yeah, I'm also saying that this, for a luxury sedan where, the way I would use this car is to get to the airport and back, to get around town and back. It's got plenty of juice. 3,000 feet of elevation. Anyway, we'll get through some of this traffic. We're at about 75% fuel level and at 354.6 miles. So I'll update you as to our, I guess, usage. There's no like percentage gauge. The car's still predicting well over 200 miles with 75% even being driven like this. And I'll let you know what happens when we get closer to the top. But so far, initial impressions, like the Mirai, solid car. If you just separate the fact that maybe if you don't like hydrogen powered stuff, this is a great driver, and it's certainly a good showcase vehicle for hydrogen for those looking for it. Here's where I want a little bit more power. Okay, I'd take another couple hundred horsepower any day. Pulling out here, wide open throttle. We left some gaps for the cars in front of us. Nice NB Miata out for a cruise, the Jelly Bean. Yeah, so basically this is just me kind of feeling out the Mirai and seeing what limitations we run into with the hydrogen and electric drivetrain system. Just join me for a drive, basically, this section. I've already explained my thoughts on hydrogen, which are, I don't know. It seems like if I lived here, I would want to own one just for the novelty of it, because I think it's kind of an interesting technology. And if I didn't live here, I'd still kind of want to own one, because as long as you have a fueling station, one of them, there's a lot of private fueling stations, then you'd be good to go. So we'll just take it easy by this big car group over here. We don't need to show off in the Mirai, We're going to be taking it nice and simple. This guy's getting a picture of the Mirai. Nice. As one should. Whooshing away at full throttle. It just loves this sort of 6/10 cruise. It's a big, heavy Luxo situation, and so definitely loves to be just kind of eased into a corner. It's a good vehicle to treat with care in terms of weight transfer. Just set it over on the tire and just kind of hold it there right on the edge. That's how it likes to be driven. And it just rewards this sort of position. I've never driven such an agile and sort of fun-ish from a chassis and steering perspective Toyota ever. Like, it loves to turn. That's not the typical what you expect from a Toyota, especially, you know, most Toyotas are front-wheel drive based, Avalon, Camry, and so here it's a very unique experience being able to have this rear drive situation. Really makes this car feel like it's worth the money in the driving dynamics department. Our fuel gauge hasn't even really moved at all. Now, driving up here in an EV, I can burn 30-40% state of charge, you know, driving gently, and I could toast a battery going from the bottom to Newcomb's. You know, maybe let's just say in like a Taycan or an e-tron GT, I could probably burn 60% of the battery if I hammered it the whole way on like a Wednesday morning at 5 a.m. And here I'm going significantly slower than I would on no traffic days, just because, you know, it's a Sunday afternoon and we're not here to, you know, get in anyone's way, or we need to leave some room if someone's coming the wrong way down and there's rock slides and a whole bunch of stuff. But I feel like perhaps this is handling the harder driving better than what an electric vehicle would do. Now, granted, this doesn't make much power, so that's also another consideration. Those cars that I mentioned make significantly more power, which would burn the energy faster because there's more heat loss at that stage. But I mean, I'm going wide open down these straightaways and it's handling it just fine. Beautiful views off in the distance as always. And we're just gently motoring. It's a very surprisingly pleasant experience to drive this thing through here. Wow! And like very grown up from the way that it does everything. This is wonderful! I love driving big cars kind of quickly, whether they're SUVs or sedans. Like, I had an S-Class recently, and I drove that thing on the canyon roads and loved every second of it with rear-wheel steering, and it was so neat. So I definitely enjoy kind of doing things with cars that are not meant to be doing this. You know, driving cross-country in a battery electric vehicle, shredding a hydrogen car up in the hills. But this is taking it and doing it without any sort of issue, at least at the moment. Now, as we gain elevation, I'm noticing my air purification isn't going all the way to 5. So I'm thinking the hydrogen unit might be derating. It just went to 5 there. Two different situations could be happening. One, something could be getting hot, or there's some other reaction with hydrogen that doesn't allow sustained full performance. You know, there might be a peak in nominal rating. You know, not temperature related, from a chemical reaction standpoint. I'm not sure. That I'm just guessing. The other situation could be we've hit a thermal limit somewhere. And then, of course, we're not going to be able to flow as much oxygen. Yeah, it's definitely coming off of 5 there. We're not going to be able to flow as much oxygen because there's just less air density at altitude. And so perhaps the electric air compressor compensates for that. That could be certainly a situation. These are all the things that I need to find out, and I'd love to talk with some engineers on. And then perhaps next time I drive the Mirai, I'll study up, do all the research to all the questions we have answers, or we have questions to. I want to get all the answers to the questions we have, is what I'm trying to say. And then, you know, give a real detailed, informative review, not just me finding things out. i3 shredding, that's awesome. i3s handle so well. Interesting, this car uses a very similar material to the i3 in the hydrogen tanks, carbon fiber reinforced polymer. Thank you very much to this person. Hazards on, wide open throttle. I can see a little bit of the mist of the water coming out of the exhaust situation. That's awesome. I was like, oh, it's a hot day. I wonder if the motorcyclist behind me earlier wants to get cool. I was going to dump the H2O on him, and then I thought, oh, well, that might be a little bit rude. To do an H2O purge to cool off the guy behind us, but it's actually not that warm out. Wow! The noises. It's definitely still pulling. Oh, it's derating. So it was going down to 5.5, 4,000 liters per minute of oxygen purification, which means the hydrogen system has hit some kind of limitation there. Some kind. Not sure which one. A lot of bikes out today. And that's really interesting. I'd love to find out what's going on. Right now, the battery pack is providing assistance only under very heavy load, and that's because it's actually at low states of charge. So even if I let off and regen, the hydrogen system and the electric regen system are charging the battery. Now, what happens in Toyota hybrids sometimes is the battery pack will overheat and it shuts that off, and then you're relying on combustion. And so I wonder how that works in this case, if in fact all of the energy from the hydrogen fuel cell has to go directly through the battery pack into the electric motor. If that's not the case, then it would still work. That's kind of what I want to overheat it, because you would think if we overheat the battery pack driving it like this, right, big throttle, big regen, big throttle, big regen, you know, the car's not going to let you hurt it. There's designed operating limits as to which it will stay in. In theory, it would just shut down if that was the case. And so I guess that's a good way to see if truly the fuel cell can power directly the electric motor to the wheels. I will say it's starting to feel a little bit slower, and that could just be the electric motor getting warm, because I'm wide open throttle and we are barely accelerating. But that's not too dissimilar from underpowered EVs. If I had a Nissan Leaf behind me, for example, driving this way, similar situation. Like I mentioned, the hydrogen stuff still kind of feels like early days, but the integration of between the battery pack, the electric motor, and the hydrogen stack providing energy seems to be really well thought out in this car. And it just loves to just cruise through these corners at a very mild but brisk pace. And I love to hustle it through here. This is great. Hydrogen. Never thought I'd say I'm enjoying it. I was like, I'm going to drive the Mirai and hydrogen's going to be the dumbest thing. And then I get to a fueling station and it works in 5 minutes without drama. Video coming. I just am a little bit shocked on both fronts, because I also came here to drive the BZ4X. That video is already live on this channel. And I thought that was going to be such a letdown, and that drove really nice. Let's just carry some speed through here. Oh yes, full compression of the suspension. Nailing it. Top speed, we're not even close to it because it doesn't make great power. Yeah, so what is there to say? I'm basically in what seemingly feels like a pretty low power, electric, sporty-ish luxury sedan. Luxury sedan first with some sporting credentials. The entire suspension system, I believe, is multi-link, and it is completely bespoke to this car. Doesn't share really any components with anything. So Toyota like really engineered this thing from the ground up, which props to them. That must have cost quite a bit of money. If only they would put that much money into their electric cars, I would be very pleased. Both of these, this and the BZ4X, need way better software to help owners find charging stations and to understand how to use them and what's the proper usage of them. For example, you don't want to charge a battery electric vehicle to 100% every day, depending on cell chemistry. Well, what do you want to do with the BZ4X? Give us some guidance. And here, it shows me all the gas stations in the nav system. Like, that's not going to help me at all. Show me all the hydrogen stations and pipe in the real-time data of the hydrogen units. Like, why is this hard? I don't know. This should be top priority. Oh, Focus RS, absolutely sending it. That was wonderful. And so I think Toyota definitely, like, there's an internal team that's like, we're trying to make clean cars, whether it's hydrogen, electric, or unicorn farts. I don't really care. But there's another team inside of there that doesn't understand what the end user needs for support for driving these vehicles. Now, my understanding is this car comes with an app, a Toyota app, that will show you everything on your phone, but why wouldn't it just come straight into the nav system and just be piped in? Makes no sense to me. That you could just go to the California Air Resources Board and look up the hydrogen stations. I believe it's on their website, or it's californiafuelcell.org something. And anyway, you just Google search fuel cell availability. It'll show you all the stations, how many kilograms of hydrogen they have ready to pump, where they are, if they're, you know, pressurizing, if they're empty, if they have an issue for whatever reason. And that should just all be in the car, and it should do route planning with hydrogen stations. It's not difficult stuff here, I would think. But I'm not a software engineer. I just know other people have done it. So if smaller companies can do it, then Toyota surely can do it. But I will say, I've been hammering this thing, right? We've been hustling it. We're just slowing down here. No signs of actually any overheating. We've had the hydrogen unit back down a little bit, but it still feels, now that it's had a chance to sort of recover, it feels about the same power levels. And I think, if anything, that was probably just the electric motor getting warm. Probably not even anything to do with the hydrogen system. But great longevity. We've used 1/8 of a tank coming up here, which is way less than what we would have used in an equivalent electric vehicle by far. And it actually feels downright sprightly after that little cool down period. So call me impressed with the durability of me driving this thing hard. I mean, you guys have joined me for the drive, and certainly very, very interesting new world. It is silent at speed because you do hear a bit more wind, and that means you can't really actually even hear the hydrogen unit working. Hammering. Yeah, you guys can just join me all the way up to Newcomb's, and that'll be that. But loving it. Great camping area right around here too. Very poised chassis. Very poised chassis. Nicer than the LS that I've driven. I've spent quite a bit of time with the LS, and it's a little bit longer, so it's a little less sprightly. The ES is front wheel drive based, and so that doesn't drive nearly as good as this thing does. And you can certainly have some fun in the Mirai if you are comfortable just welding your foot to the floor. Hyundai Veloster N, going for it. Nice. Love to see the car enthusiasm around here. 996. 996s are back in style, I have to say. The 911 prices have just bubbled, and it's just brought the 996 up back to desirable levels. The egg yolk headlights are looking cool, and oh man, so there's another GoPro beeping away. And well, that brings us to the end of the video. I have to say, call me impressed with the package of the car. Forget hydrogen fuels for a second. The car is awesome. This is a stellar vehicle. The refueling process, the hydrogen aspect of energy efficiency, maybe not so much yet. But I have to say, based off my experience, it's been a wonderful user experience. And honestly, no complaints from this trip, and I see why people buy these things. You get free fuel, and free fuel for 3 years if you lease one for a few $100 a month. You definitely couldn't lease anything for $600 a month that drives nearly half as nice as this car does. And take the parking brake off because the brakes are warm. It just seems like a make sense thing. If you don't take long road trips and you don't really drive much, and you're okay if you have to check an app to see if your station is online before you go, well, this makes sense. Never thought I'd say that. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.